Slamming a suitcase filled with $100,000 in cash onto the desk sealed the transaction. Greene controlled a narcotics network that moved 1,221 pounds of cocaine across 3,000 miles. Yet he was actually a decorated IRS special agent with 12 years of experience. Federal colleagues in 1980s, Orlando considered Gary Gene Greene a star investigator with an impeccable record. The architect of this shadow empire balanced his federal badge against. Greene joined the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division in 1972, quickly establishing himself as one of the most capable. He was sharp, calculated, and deeply familiar with the complex movement of illicit money. By the early 1980s, the Treasury Department tapped him for Operation Greenback, a pioneering federal task force specifically designed to dismantle the financial infrastructure of South American drug cartels. The irony was as thick as the Florida air. While he stood before cameras and judges as the man protecting the American economy from dirty money, he was secretly collaborating with his brother Lamar to build a smuggling network that bridged the gap between the jungles of Colombia. Greene's greatest weapon in this dual existence wasn't a firearm or a hidden ledger. It was his digital credentials. As a high-ranking special agent, he possessed unrestricted access to the Treasury Enforcement Communications System, known simply as TECS. This was the government's central nervous system for keeping track of suspects, planes, and investigations. From his government-issued terminal, the man they called G-Man would regularly run the tail numbers of his own smuggling aircraft and the names of his co-conspirators. He was looking for red flags, searching for any sign that the DEA or Customs had placed a lookout on his operation. He utilized the prestige of his badge as an impenetrable shield, providing a safe harbor for a syndicate that eventually moved over $40 million worth of narcotics. His status as a top-tier investigator allowed him to operate with almost zero internal oversight, enjoying the absolute trust of a branch of law enforcement that, at the time. But there was one detail that didn't make sense, and no one noticed it yet. This deep-seated corruption allowed Greene to operate with a sense of total invincibility, believing that the very system he was paid to uphold would forever serve as his perfect cover. While the public saw a hero fighting the drug wars, the reality was a sophisticated counterintelligence operation run from within the heart of the United States Treasury. The organization grew with an efficiency that mirrored Gary's own professional rise, yet its foundations were built on the very systems designed to destroy the drug trade. In the humid heat of the early 1980s, Gary and Lamar Greene orchestrated a logistical masterpiece that spanned thousands of miles across international borders. From the dense, hidden processing labs in Colombia to the quiet, pine-scented rural roads near Valdosta, Georgia, the brothers established a cocaine pipeline that purposefully bypassed. They prioritized rural secrecy over urban speed, using the vast, unmonitored stretches of the American South to their advantage. Small, twin-engine planes would dip low over the tree lines, landing on remote strips where the only witnesses were the crickets and the midnight air. What started as a series of small-scale protection favors was about to become a massive criminal empire. By 1982, the syndicate's reach had expanded significantly. They were no longer just moving occasional packages. They were coordinating massive, high-stakes shipments. Federal records later confirmed that during this period, the ring moved more than 1,221 pounds of pure cocaine into the United States. This was an amount of narcotics carrying a staggering street value of over $40 million. Gary's role in this was indispensable. While Lamar managed the boots-on-the-ground logistics, coordinating with seasoned drug pilots like Tommy Henderson and overseeing the offloading of heavy white-wrapped bundles, Gary remained the silent architect behind a government computer terminal. Lamar, "The board is green," he might signal, indicating that no law enforcement lookouts were active in the system. Using his high-level credentials, he monitored the Treasury Enforcement Communications System to ensure their planes remained ghosts. Gary was effectively creating shadows and then stepping into them, laundering over $1.5 million in drug proceeds through various fronts. He was living the ultimate contradiction. A decorated investigator who was now the primary beneficiary of the narcotics trade. In the high-stakes world of international narcotics, it is rarely the masterminds who falter first. It is the couriers. The men caught in the crosswinds of a rural landing strip with too much weight in the fuselage and not enough luck. For the Greene syndicate, that weak link was Tommy Henderson. Henderson was a veteran drug pilot who knew the jagged coastlines and hidden pastures of the South, as well as he knew the controls of his aircraft. When he was intercepted on a charge that seemed entirely unrelated to the Orlando operation, the entire house of cards began to tremble. In the pressurized environment of a windowless interrogation room, Henderson realized his loyalty would not buy his freedom. He offered the FBI a name that the agents initially refused to believe. He spoke of an elite investigator in the heart of Florida, a man who didn't just know the law, but manipulated it to clear flight paths for cocaine shipments. Everything they believed up to this point was wrong. This wasn't merely a case of a compromised agent. It was a professional criminal enterprise spearheaded by a man who had been given the keys to the kingdom. The FBI, working alongside the IRS Internal Security Division, launched a shadow investigation that required surgical precision. Gary Greene was a sophisticated adversary. He knew how to spot a tail, and he understood the digital footprint left behind by every federal query. To catch him, they had to watch a man who spent his professional life watching others. Investigators began to audit the logs of the Treasury Enforcement Communications System, known as TECS. It was the government's most sensitive database. The logs revealed that Greene had been searching for the tail numbers of his own smuggling planes to see if they were under surveillance. He was using the government's own shield as his private radar. In January 1984, the focus shifted from a general inquiry to a dedicated pursuit of the man his peers called the G-Man. They watched as he handled suitcases filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars, representing the very money he was supposedly tasked with tracking down during his work with Operation Greenback. But as the investigation deepened, they realized Greene's influence was not limited to just one office, and his ability to see the government's moves in advance made him a ghost that was nearly impossible to pin down. The agents knew they had only one chance to strike before the G-Man vanished into the shadows with the millions he had already successfully laundered. The pursuit of the decorated agent was no longer just a criminal investigation. It had become a race to prevent one of the most significant security breaches in the history of the Department of the Treasury. The air was thick with the humidity of the Florida Everglades, as for years, the operation had run with a level of precision that baffled local law enforcement. But every criminal enterprise has a breaking point. That break came in the form of a man named Thomas E. Henderson. Tommy was a drug pilot, the kind of man who could land a plane on a postage stamp in the middle of a Georgia pine forest if it meant avoiding the authorities. In early 1984, Henderson found himself cornered on an unrelated criminal charge. Facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, when he finally spoke, the investigators from the FBI and the IRS Internal Security Division were stunned by the confession. Henderson didn't just mention a common drug lord. He pointed directly at a decorated star of the Internal Revenue Service. He told them about a man in Orlando who provided the cleared flight paths and the counterintelligence needed to bypass federal lookout files. This was the impossible lead. The call was coming from inside the house. The investigation quickly transitioned into a high-stakes game of shadows. To catch a man who knew every trick in the investigative book, the FBI had to be flawless and unseen. They began to scrutinize the Treasury Enforcement Communications System, or TECS, looking for the digital fingerprints of an insider. What they found was a staggering abuse of power. Gary Gene Greene had been using his high-level clearance to run the tail numbers of smuggling aircraft and the names of his own co-conspirators. The very databases designed to protect the borders were being used to welcome massive cocaine shipments into the heart of the country. As special agents began to monitor their own colleague, they realized that Greene wasn't just a passive participant. He was the architect of the entire security shield. But the courtroom in Orlando felt heavy in March 1985 as the trial of Gary Gene Greene began. For the veteran investigators of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, watching one of their most decorated stars stand in the defendant's chair was a moment of profound professional grief. Gary had once represented the gold standard of financial investigation, a man who had helped pioneer the federal task forces meant to dismantle the very type of organization he was now accused of leading. But as the proceedings unfolded, the prosecution dismantled the G-Man persona piece by piece, showing a gallery of observers just how deep the rot had reached. The primary witness against him was someone Gary never expected to see again: the drug pilot, Tommy Henderson. Henderson detailed exactly how Gary used his credentials as a shield, ensuring that planes filled with over 1,200 pounds of cocaine could touch down on quiet Georgia airstrips without any interference from federal radar. Even as the evidence mounted, the public wondered if a man with Gary's connections and history could truly be held accountable by the system he had mastered for 12 years. The atmosphere remained tense, with no one certain of the outcome until the very last moment. Finally, on April 1st, 1985, the tension broke when the jury returned its verdict. Gary Gene Greene was found guilty on 14 separate counts, including conspiracy to import cocaine and money laundering. He wasn't just a participant. He was identified as the lead architect of a multi-million-dollar syndicate. U.S. District Judge George C. Young did not show leniency when sentencing arrived in May. Gary was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, marking one of the harshest penalties ever given to a federal agent. His brother Lamar received a 25-year sentence for managing the logistics of their empire. The fallout from the Greene case fundamentally altered the structure of federal law enforcement. The IRS Internal Security Division was completely overhauled, leading to more rigorous background reinvestigations and the creation of strict need-to-know protocols for the Treasury Enforcement Communications System database Gary had abused. Access logs and digital footprints became mandatory standard practice, ensuring that no agent could ever again run unauthorized searches on aircraft or associates without triggering internal alerts. This case remains a cautionary tale in training academies, a reminder that the most dangerous enemies are sometimes the ones. If this story of betrayal within the highest levels of the government gave you chills, hit subscribe and the notification. What do you think is the best way to prevent this kind of? Drop your theory in the comments below.